Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of Visual Abstracts and the Effective Communication of Science. This time, we're going to be focusing on tips and tricks of visual abstract design. Just as a reminder, this is a talk that is based on a talk I gave at the American Society of Nephrology in November of 2022. My name is Sophia Ambruso. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center and University of Colorado School of Medicine. So let's get started. VA content and design tips and tricks. So let's just get started. Things that we want to start with like what we should be thinking about in general when we are making visual abstracts. And what I'm going to start with here is talk about some of the do's, and I'm going to provide some examples of what we don't want to do. So number one, keep it simple. If it's too complex, it's really hard to follow. And actually, a lot of readers will take one look at it and be like, oh, that's too much for my brain to input. I'm just not even going to look at it. Use the same terminology that's used by the authors. Include statistics if it's provided. Make sure you are defining any uncommon acronyms. And sometimes you need to double check and make sure that they are acronyms that are also common enough for the everyday scientific reader, not somebody who's an expert in the field. Avoid the temptation of adding some of those beautiful key figures from a manuscript. Oftentimes, those are really difficult to read on a small scale. Remember, people are looking at this figure on their phone because that's where they get on their social media account. And they're also difficult to interpret without context. And I always say, if you put this on a slide and you say, this is a busy slide, but don't put it on a visual abstract. If you have to stand in front of that slide or that figure and explain what it means, don't put it on a visual abstract. And finally, avoid inserting personal interpretation in the conclusions. So I'm going to give you a sample of a few visual abstracts that actually are from very good journals and probably a really good manuscript. So this is not any reflection of the science that's presented. But when you're putting this on a visual abstract, remember that the people that are looking this are not just experts in your field or experts in this topic. They're other people that maybe we're trying to bring to the field or bring to come read this. Somebody that might find it interesting, but ordinarily wouldn't seek it out. So I just want to highlight here, there are some figures here that don't really have much context. We don't know what they are. There are a lot of this EBNA, this BZLF, this LMP. We have no idea what they're referring to when we're talking about this. And then we have a lot of acronyms here that are not LCL, TCR, and this TAC is defined over here. And then if you look at these figures down here, you can barely even see what each of these bars is representing. So if you can imagine, if you're looking at this on your phone or even on your iPad, it's going to be really hard to read that. They do define it over here, but this takes a lot to interpret, and really figuring out what this is trying to say. I'm not going to look at this and be like, oh, this is fascinating. I'm going to look at it and be like, gosh, that's a lot for me to try and figure out. I'm not going to go any further. Another good example, again, I said these are from really good journals, so probably great science. But number one, bad figure, bad image, hard to see. The text is too small. And then if you look at these figures, I guarantee these are fantastic actually in the journal. But here I have no idea what it's saying. I can't even read it. I don't know what the numbers are. And so this means very little to me. And then even this conclusion, it's a very long conclusion. It's very wordy. Finally, same thing. If you don't have the context, meaning if you're not already an expert in the field, it's really hard to interpret what this is trying to say. I'd say on the left side, this is a really good start. And I know that they're wanting to include these fantastic figures. They're really proud of these figures, but they're really not helpful for somebody who's coming to read this unless they're already an expert in the field. Okay, let's move on to actually designing a VA and some of the tips and tricks I'm going to offer here. So a design do, use templates. It's really, really helpful to use templates because then you're not reinventing the wheel. And that's what a lot of journals are starting to do, even if the journals have a big editorial process and have VA designers. And oftentimes we come up with that template and that design together so that we really like, and it's visually appealing. And then another thing is, this is always helpful for on a longitudinally oriented VA, it's convention for the intervention arm to go on top and the placebo control arm to go on the bottom. So I'm just going to show you a couple of templates that the KI reports, who I'm the social media and visual abstract editor for, what we do. So just to point out here, this is one of our templates, and you see that the intervention goes up top and then the results can come across, and then the control or the placebo is going to be down below. And this is convention, so we try and teach most people that they should be doing this. And this is just another example of a non-randomized controlled trial or intervention where we have a template. Of course, this can be manipulated in a lot of different ways, but having something to start with is really helpful. Okay, so next what I have done essentially is I took a visual abstract that I created myself, and it's actually been published, and I sort of deconstructed it and made it look really bad, and we're going to fix it together. So this is our activity. We're going to quote unquote build or fix a visual abstract together. Again, these are some of my tips and tricks. All right, so why don't you take a look? In your mind, just think, okay, do I like this? Do I not like this? And you can even start looking around and be like, what do I like about this? And what don't I like about this? And no surprise here, I purposefully made it ugly, but we'll get through this together. Okay, so let's start with color scheme. And just to highlight, this red and this blue are classic colors that actually really clash. So never, if you can avoid it, the blue and the red like this, it actually sort of plays tricks on the eyes. So pay attention to that when you're messing with your own color schemes. But do use free color scheme generators. They're out there. A fan favorite of ours is called coolers.co. Really cool how this works. And you can essentially take these colors and then apply them to your color scheme. Okay, so we're going to look here. I already told you I don't like this color scheme. I made it ugly on purpose. So, okay, that's looking a little bit better. Now we're moving in the right direction. We've got a color scheme we feel comfortable with, and we're going to move forward from there. Let's move on to icon selection. Number one, you need to find a source for icons. PowerPoint has a limited selection, and they'll get you, you can get away with using that for some things. But as you get into more extensive journal articles that you're trying to create visual abstracts for, you usually have to go to an icon subscription service. And then you truly do have a near endless selection of icons. So some of our fan favorites, the Noun Project and Flat Icon, are fantastic. A pro tip, add your icon source to your PowerPoint toolbar. Yes, you can do that. It's really helpful and it saves a lot of time. And then you make sure that if you're not going to use something that you've subscribed to, you have permission for all your figures and images. Now, from an icon selection perspective, do select icons that match in style. So this is actually an error that is made by even some fairly experienced visual abstract designers. But see, if you look on the left here, we see these are called solid flat icons. Here, these are sort of black outline icons. And when we get to the colored icons, you can see that there are still outlined and non-outlined icons. And that's something that's important to pay attention to. And it really does help with cohesiveness and the feeling of organization and reduction of clutter, or the sense of clutter on a visual abstract, and really cleans up an image. Okay, so we're going to take a quick look here. Now we can see up here we have two outlines, and then we have these solid ones, and then another outline, and the rest are solid. So why don't we go ahead and change this? If you were to do this yourself, if you like the outline look better, that's what you would do. For this journal, for Kidney International Reports, one of our editorial style is sort of the solid flat icon. So there we go. I have corrected that look. I've changed these to a solid flat. This thermometer, as well as this person on the park bench. Back to icon selection. Now it's important to be very cautious with icons that you're selecting. You want to avoid racially or culturally insensitive figures. A good example is if you're going to talk about a person from Mexico, don't use a sombrero. Perhaps use an icon representing the country of Mexico. Avoid religious symbols. So if you're going to be talking about mortality, not everybody is Christian. So if you choose a tombstone that can reliably represent mortality, remove the religious symbols. Also, avoid flippant images. Utilizing a skull and crossbones is not necessarily the most sensitive way to demonstrate or communicate mortality. And then also be gender, racial, inclusive, or neutral. So if you're going to be talking about an entire population, you need to be including both genders and all races, or you can choose icons that are more neutral. And then icon quality, be mindful when you're resizing your icon. So I just want to highlight here, if you look over here, this is kind of a stretched calendar. This is a more appropriately sized calendar, or sometimes we'll call this squished, actually, this calendar. And then you have this stretched other icon over here. And just a key tip that I've learned is if you're trying to resize and you're having a hard time with it, you actually hold down the shift button and then you grab at the corner and you can actually, it'll maintain the dimensions of whatever you're trying to resize. So that can be really, really helpful. Hold down the shift button and then resize whatever it is. Okay, so now we're gonna look here. So when I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, darn it. When I resize this calendar, I smushed it. And when I resize this icon here, this data collection icon, I stretched it. And then even over here, we've got this water tank that's also been squished a little bit. So this is something that also needs to be fixed. And there, we've fixed that. Starting to look a little bit better. Okay, now let's talk about font size and style. So do try to use font size of 16 or more for really important information. Remember that people are going to be looking at this on their phone. You want them to be able to read it. Use font size hierarchy. And when I say that, for subtitles or titles, you want larger font. And then as you get into sort of the subsections, you want slightly smaller font, and things that are less important don't need to be highlighted, draw the reader through. Font size hierarchy can be helpful. And then use sans serif font style. So this is the font style that doesn't have all these fun little curly cues at the top and bottom, which actually supposedly is harder to read. And if we're having people that are reading this on small devices, we want it to be as easy to read as possible. All right, so here it looks like we don't have anything that's serif, so no need to change it to sans serif. But it looks like all the text is about the same size, and maybe this is a little bit bigger here, but this is all the same size. So I'm going to resize it, make it easier for us to read. You see that I've made the title larger here. I've even made this unbold because this information is a little bit less important. Okay, so let's talk about alignment and spacing. And I know some of you are probably looking at this and like, please fix that. It's driving me crazy. But not everybody notices as much as others do. So it can be helpful to start by left aligning text. Most instances this works. Sometimes you can center it, but left aligning really does help with the sense of organization, and it does help align other text with it. Make sure you're aligning the icons both vertically and horizontally, depending on if they're within associated spaces. And then also make sure you're aligning shapes and text. Provide space between icons and borders. So icons shouldn't be really close to the border. It makes it feel really crowded and you feel like it doesn't have sort of space to. Okay, so just taking a look at here, 1, 2, 3 of these icons are really close to this border, and it just gives it the sense of being disorganized. I'm just going to highlight, I made this really obvious, but this is these are not well aligned. We've got some that are left aligned, some of them are centered, and then we also have some of these that are centered as well. And I just want to highlight too, look at the space between this turquoise, these two turquoise boxes, and then this yellow box and these turquoise. These are uneven. You can see that there's sort of this corner here that's hanging off, and there's no space in between this box here. So if you are going to not have space between it, you should have there be no space everywhere. So it looks like it's on purpose. Right now, it looks like this has been sort of carelessly put together. So let me fix some of these things. Okay, so you've also seen I sort of added this sugarcane design element, but I've moved these over, right, away from the border. I've also left aligned these, and I've aligned all of these with one another. I've also left aligned all the text over here. And then I've moved some of these icons also over, and notice that these are vertically aligned with one another. And also notice that these are horizontally aligned, both the text and the icons. And same here, icon text, also horizontally aligned. So it really gives a sense of organization. Okay, let's talk about contrast. And this one's big. So use contrast between your text and your background color, and it really makes it easier for you to read it and easier for your reader to read it. So light text should be with dark background, and make sure that the text is light enough and the background is dark enough. Dark text should be with a light background, and that dark text needs to be dark enough, and that light background needs to be light enough. And also avoid excess light text on dark background. Don't make the entire visual abstract white text with a dark background, because that actually strains the eyes. Okay, so what you can see here is that this background is pretty dark, and so is this text. Also here, background is dark and text is dark. So let's fix it. Excellent. Much easier to read. We don't have an excess of white on dark, white text on dark background, but it does look nice and it can be read. And I just wanted to highlight here, look at what happens if I put light text on a pretty light background. Really hard to read. So we should be avoiding this. That looks better. Okay, so organization and result emphasis. So this gets a little bit more advanced, but I still think, because this already looks pretty good. If we look back, this looks good, and a lot of people would be happy with this. So getting a little bit more advanced, we can use boxes and shapes to cluster information, which provides the appearance of additional organization, and it allows emphasis of information by playing with grouping and colors and contrast. So let's just take a look how I changed this. So now you can see I'm really emphasizing the results here, made it even easier to read it. And I added a couple design elements, but this really looks organized and the eye goes down and around and follows it quite nicely. And that's it. We have made our visual abstract, or at least fixed a deconstructed visual abstract. I hope you like what I've done. I just want to highlight some things. Remember, we've got this alignment of both icons and text. The icons are far away from the border and they're aligned with one another. Similar over here, we've got aligned icons, and they're aligned both vertically and horizontally. Again, that gives a sense of a lot of organization, and it helps the eye move from one section to the next. I also want to just point out the space here between these background blocks. These spaces are pretty even. They're sort of an equal size, and then a space even from this block over here and the right side border. So this also sort of creates a sense of organization. So now we're at the standardization and quality improvement phase, and I'm trying to teach you all how to make your own visual abstracts. And hopefully by some of the tips that I provided in the first presentation and this, you can improve your own design skills. And then you'll seek out assistance and try and find some primers and some tutorials to improve your skills. So I included this in the last one. This is a VA content development toolkit. We've got the Nephrology Social Media Collective internship. It's not just for nephrologists. Do check it out if you have any interest. Again, Dr. Ibrahim has his 2016 primer on how to create a visual abstract. See, Jason has their own primer. Mind the Graph can be helpful. And then check out Michelle Lim's and Dr. Millar's editorial on the role of visual abstracts in the dissemination of medical research. Finally, some visual abstract design toolkit stuff, color schemes, coolers.co, like I said, is one of our favorites. And then for icons, the Noun Project, www.thenounproject.com, Flat Icon, www.flaticon.com. Remember, those are subscription services, but definitely worth it if you're going to be making more visual abstracts. You can always take a look and see what PowerPoint has available. That's usually where we're making our visual abstracts. But these are helpful, and the majority of us have that subscription. Okay, and thanks again. I'm Sophia Ambruso. My Twitter handle is @Sophia_kidney. Like I said, these are some of my pet projects, my podcasts that I do for non-nephrologists, nsmcblog.org, kireports.org, our blog page, kireportscommunity.org. ABC Kidney is my labor of love, will someday become an animated interactive tutorial for kidney physiology for all those who are nephro curious. And then of course Freely Filtered is a Twitter handle for another podcast that I participate in discussing NephJC, nephrology, journal topics that are moving the profession forward. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me, and please certainly feel free to reach out if you have questions.